So I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce Jimmy Song, an instructor and educator in blockchain programming. He provides litigation consulting surrounding Bitcoin and has a programming book on how to learn Bitcoin from scratch. And most importantly, Jimmy would like to bring sound money into the world again. My name is Jasmine, Business Development Manager at ECOS.com, South African representative. And we provide information technology and Bitcoin mining services. Jimmy, welcome. Pleasure having you here.
Well, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be on.
All right. So let's just start from the top. So we've seen an overall increase in demand of cryptocurrencies in terms of moving and sending money more efficiently. We've seen this trend in Asia. Governments have no control over the inner workings of Bitcoin currency. So where do you see this going?
Well, Bitcoin is sound money, and a lot of people are asking the right questions, which is concerning all of the money printing that's going on. If you look at just the U.S. dollar, the Federal Reserve has printed somewhere in the vicinity of $2.6 trillion in a matter of 3 months. Just to give you an idea, the M2 money supply as of mid-February, it was around $15.4 trillion. It's currently around 18 trillion. That's an increase of something like 17% in a matter of 3 months. This is hyperinflation territory, even for the U.S. dollar, and it's going to get worse for other currencies that have the pyramid on top of it. So, in a sense, the question
what about
you're
the gold
asking,
standard?
Yeah, I don't. The gold has been completely manipulated, and I think we saw through Bretton Woods that it really wasn't working. And the thing about gold that makes it very difficult is that it is very easy to fractionally reserve lend it. So, as a result, it's finite, but I mean, if you can fractionally reserve lend it, then it becomes virtually infinite, and that's the problem. Very few people keep physical gold or exchange physical gold. And that's kind of what you have to do in order to make gold like an actual store of value for yourself. So the reason why Bitcoin is being looked at by so many people is because of all this money printing. Everyone knows about the 21 million limit in Bitcoin. And as soon as you look into it, you see that it's a very good place to place your money.
So do you think that this is sort of the start or the beginning of the end of the financial system as we know it?
I certainly hope so, because the fiat money system has been an evil that is unparalleled in many ways. And I just finished reading through the book, The Ethics of Money Production. And if you haven't read it, it's an excellent book about all of the evils that fiat money brings forth, including just very high time preference behavior all over the world. Just a complete unfairness with respect to the financial system, the rich getting richer, the poor getting poorer. Just the entire world runs on debt and malinvestment. And that's all of the money, all of the value capture is happening to those that already are in power, and not towards the people that are actually producing it. And Bitcoin on sound money, that brings us to a place where more we can have a fairer world where people can actually store value and create goods and products that other people want instead of whatever the venture capitalists want and so on.
But you say fair, the word, the term fair, because now I'm seeing a trend where governments are all of a sudden trying to control everything. They're trying to get in the middle of that. Right now, I won't say which country exactly, but there are countries where, for instance, China, let's say, where people aren't allowed to mine Bitcoins, where it's made Bitcoin, where it's made illegal. There are countries that are actually putting laws in place right now and saying that if people use hard currency to buy Bitcoin, then it will be illegal and they'll be facing jail time. So, what ideas come to your mind when government officials try to use this, regulation?
Yeah,
it's not friendly.
Yeah, and this is what governments have been doing for hundreds of years now is impose some form of capital controls. And let's face it, that's essentially a capital control. It's a way of restricting the conversion from one currency to another. And sadly, that this is necessary in order to run your own central bank policy. There's a famous central banking trilemma, which is that you can have 2 out of 3 of these things, and that is independent monetary policy, a peg currency, or some peg to another currency, and free capital flows.
Mm-hmm.
Generally, free capital flows is the one thing that central banks give up in order to get the other 2, which is a peg to another currency, usually the US dollar,
Mm-hmm.
and an independent monetary policy, the ability to print as much money as they want. With Bitcoin, you're kind of forced to give a free capital flows, because there's always a market for Bitcoin. It's kind of like the black market, how it works now in most countries. Usually there's some US dollars floating somewhere as a hedge, but you have to go into the black market, and you have to physically receive the cash in order to participate in the black market. With Bitcoin, it's very different because it's digital, and you don't have to go into some seedy place in order to go exchange your local currency for US dollars or sell goods and services and so on. You have the ability to do that at home. So, the government's ability to restrict capital flows is definitely limited, and that's a good thing. I think it allows for people to store value. The reason why a lot of governments restrict this is because they're very afraid of not being able to print money, and not having power, and not being able to control people's lives, and not being able to choose winners and losers, and give favors to their political cronies. So taking that power away from them through Bitcoin is a very good thing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so what methods can third world nations develop for the practical use of cryptocurrency? You said that obviously it's decentralized, but this requires some sort of infrastructure, right? And if you look at the situation globally right now, there's a lot of political unrest, upheaval, suppression. So give me your perspective on this, basically.
Yeah, so I think I read a statistic somewhere, something like more than 60% of the world owns a cell phone. So that's probably enough. As long as you have an internet connection and a phone, that's enough to store your Bitcoin. That's enough to be able to possess Bitcoin. Now, whether or not you have an exchange that you can go to and exchange for Bitcoins, that's for other entrepreneurs in your area to be able to create. But I mean, there are exchanges all over the world. I know there's one in Nigeria. My friend runs it. I know there's one in the Middle East. I know there's one in the Philippines. I mean, pretty much every country that you can name, there's some on-ramp to Bitcoin if you're smart enough to look for it. If you have that, then you can go and possess your own Bitcoins by downloading a wallet onto your phone. There's a lot of Android and iOS wallets that you can use. Once you have that, then you can possess your Bitcoin on your phone, and you can back it up, put your seed phrase in a secure place, and it's you can access it whenever you need to, should you lose your phone or someone steal your phone, and so on. So it's about the most unconfiscatable, most secure form of currency that we've ever had, because pretty much every other currency that we know, they can be seized very, very easily. If it's physical, then the government just takes it whenever you have it on your person. If it's digital, then it's usually centralized, and that means that wherever you're storing it, say it's at a bank, they can just seize the money, or have a bail-in or whatever it is, and that those are all ways in which the government controls the money. But with Bitcoin, it's completely different, because it's decentralized and digital, and that means that you have the ability to secure it on relatively cheap hardware, and you can it's not subject to confiscation.
But what about the hardware being outdated?
I think if you have a phone that's within the last 5 or 6 years, that's probably good enough. I would even go as far as to say, like, I mean, there were Bitcoin wallets back in 2011. So even if your wallets are like 10 years old, or your iPhone is 10 years old, you could probably run a Bitcoin wallet on there. And you can run a Bitcoin wallet on a Raspberry Pi. Those things are like $30 US. It's extremely affordable, and the ability to store money is a fundamental human right that I think gets overlooked in in a vast array of other human rights that people are fighting for instead.
So is that what you're referring to mostly as cloud mining, right? Where everything is on the neural network and people have access to mining Bitcoins.
No. That's not what I'm referring to. Cloud mining is pretty different. That's the ability to go and create your own Bitcoin through use of electricity. That's very different. What I'm talking about is the ability to store Bitcoin. If you can find somebody to give you Bitcoin for money or for goods or services, then you can store it on your phone pretty easily. And this happens all over the world. Mining is a whole different game, and mining is it tends to go. It's a lot like gold mining, which I'm sure you're familiar with being from South Africa. The people that specialize in gold mining know a lot about geology and chemical processes and digging up dirt out of the ground and processing it and all that stuff to get the gold very quickly and efficiently. It's similar with Bitcoin mining. If you want a Bitcoin mine, you have to be that level of expert in being able to set up go get the hardware, run the essentially a mining farm, keep the machines updated, make sure that they're running at their optimum and things like that. So most people don't go into it, and most people, frankly, shouldn't. It's a very difficult business, and unless you happen to be an electrical engineer that's very good at keeping ASICs up and have expertise in running data centers and access to very cheap liquid electricity sources and so on, that's generally not a good idea. The better way to earn Bitcoin is to just work, right? Whatever you happen to be good at. If you're a good accountant, be an accountant, but then go take the money that you earn as an accountant and go buy Bitcoin with it. That's a much easier way to go get Bitcoin than to try to go mine it. And this is a mistake that a lot of people make when they first come into the Bitcoin industry, is that they go, okay, well, I heard about this mining thing, I should get into mining. You find out very, very quickly that the people that mine are very, very good at it, and you have no chance against them. It's kind of like learning about the game of poker and thinking that you can go beat the best pros in the world and make money off of them. It's not going to happen. If you want to go in that direction, you're probably going to have to put in a good 5-10 years of education and being in that industry before you have any chance at all against those people. Now, if you want to go down that route, be my guest. Maybe you can add something to the mining industry. But in general, for most people, whatever your talent happens to be, that's how you should go make money so you can go buy Bitcoin.
All right. So what's your forecast for how much a Bitcoin will cost in the next, let's say, 3 years or year maybe? That's too far.
Yeah.
Let's do it over the next 10 months.
Yeah, so the price predictions are notoriously difficult in Bitcoin because, the market's the market. You have no idea where the demand is going to come from and so on. I suspect that the recent supply shock of the halving will have an effect eventually in Bitcoin. But whether or not that'll happen in the next 6 months or the next 24 months, I don't know. But at some point, the fact that miners are only producing 6.25 Bitcoins per block and instead of 12.5, which was the case about a month ago, means that there's going to be a lot less Bitcoin available for sale. And that means that price will tend to go up. Now, how much that goes up and so on, there's some very good analyses by Plan B and so on with the stock to flow model. And that predicts somewhere in the range of 100,000 to 280,000 in the next 4 years or so. There are other people that have predicted based on other models. But I mean, generally speaking, from a very basic economic level, here's the value prop of Bitcoin. There's a fixed supply. There's never, ever going to be more than 21 million Bitcoins. That we know. And there's increasing demand as, all the other things that are being shown to not be actually scarce. So as a result, you have a fixed supply and increasing demand. Generally, we know what happens to price when those two things are coinciding.
There's also been a trend of mining farms where they, after the halving process, they just fall out of business. They can't keep up. Okay, let's say with the increase in technology, the systems, and also halving affects them really hectically, right? So, what are your views on this? Why is that happening? Why do you see this trend happening to these businesses?
Yeah, I mean, basically, they didn't plan well enough. Again, it's not very different than gold mining. If the price of gold drops below a certain point, it becomes unprofitable to go mine in certain gold mines, and as a result, they either go bankrupt or stop mining there. And those are very common things in the gold mining world and pretty much any industry. Once it becomes unprofitable to do something, you'll just stop, and that's the market process at work. A lot of people, a lot of companies got into mining thinking that they can optimize the heck out of it and so on. Turns out that mining is really, really hard, and keeping the equipment running and available, getting the sourcing the electricity, making sure that everything's running smoothly, having the right technicians, running the data center, having the right power sources and backups and things like that. It's a really hard business, and it's not a surprise that many people have gone bankrupt in it. There's among Bitcoin mining manufacturers, I think in 2014, 2015, we saw something like 6 or 7 bankruptcies, and it wouldn't surprise me if there were an equivalent number of mining farms that also went bankrupt. It's a hard business, and this is why I say don't go into it. It's a lot of the people that go into it lose a lot of money. But if you do what you're good at,
what if there was support from governmental institutions, for instance, or venture capital funds? What if it's not just a business that's going and putting their risk into it? Don't you think that's sort of a balance between, just your regular business format, but as well as political backing? I think that should help. I mean, I guess that's a good formula in order to move the world in that direction, because, I mean, at the end of the day, I guess it's inevitable, right? This is going to be a currency that everybody is going to move towards. So what do you think?
Well, I don't think government help is needed at all. In fact, that almost always makes things worse. Generally, when you subsidize something, you make it worse, and that instead of allowing the market process to work. If the government were to subsidize a particular mining firm, then they're making it so that the mining firm doesn't have to be as efficient, doesn't have to get all of those things, get all of the optimizations and compete on the market, and instead they're putting the thumb on the scale to make them less, allow them to be less competitive and still make a profit. And this is a major problem in the world today, is that a lot of governments do try to subsidize certain industries, and they end up screwing up those industries. I mean, you look at something like healthcare in the United States, it's been completely wrecked, and it's a giant mess, and it costs way too much, in large part because the government has meddled with it so much. I don't think that meddling in the mining manufacturing space by governments is welcome at all, and I would challenge anyone that thinks so to actually look at how mining works. And I mean, it's been running fine without any government intervention for something like 11 years. I don't see any reason to allow them to intervene at this point.
So I'm just comparing the situation to my country, where I've gone to a bank. There's absolutely no incorporation of the technology in the systems. I'm talking about these countries, these world banks, where they bless you, where they officially accept Bitcoin. So I feel like they're kind of blocking the whole process. Or what do you think?
Well, it takes some time for a technology like this to spread out, right? It took a long time for the cell phone to reach penetration. They had cell phones back in the 1980s. Just very few people used them because they were so expensive and so on. But now something like 70% of the world owns a cell phone. So that's an incredible number to me. More people have cell phones than like running water, something like that, which is kind of insane. But Bitcoin can achieve the same type of penetration. It's just a matter of people demanding it and wanting it and looking in the market for it. Then you get entrepreneurs that know something about it, figure out that they can make money by providing the service to these people, and then that's how technology tends to grow. There may be governments that are purposefully stifling it or something like that, but I mean, in general, that I haven't seen that much of that, and it's very easy to get around if you know what you're doing. There are all sorts of like local peer-to-peer trading services and so on. I think for a long time in Africa, that was actually how a lot of people got their Bitcoin. But there's a lot of entrepreneurs in Africa right now that are getting paid in Bitcoin and so on because they know what they're doing. and once other people see that these people are prospering, then they go, hey, can you tell me what your secret is, how you made your money? And then this is how things spread. And next thing you know, like the entire economy has a little bit of that. And I'm seeing that just anecdotally right now. A lot of people are asking me about Bitcoin, people that I don't know through Bitcoin that are just sort of asking me, hey, I know you have something to do with Bitcoin. Can you tell me about it? And so on. And that's this is how things spread. This is just sort of how things develop in any society.
So about your book, I know you have two books. There's one for people who aren't really acquainted with programming. So what is your approach and how do you get the idea over to people? I know you have been asked this question before, but I have to ask the standard question. So excuse me for that.
Yeah, no problem. So the Little Bitcoin book is a book for people that don't know anything about Bitcoin. And I wrote it with 7 other authors. We're from all around the world, and it was a really fun project to do. But yeah, one of my co-authors is Timi Abijui. He's my friend in Nigeria who runs an exchange. So he knows what's going on in Africa, and he has a good perspective. And the approach that we took with the book is to not mention the word Bitcoin in the first chapter at all. In fact, the whole first chapter is about what's wrong with money today and how screwed up the monetary system is. And one of the things that Timi told me that absolutely blew me away while we were writing this book was, we were talking about the importance of the U.S. dollar, and somebody was arguing that the U.S. dollar wasn't that important internationally. And Timi was like, no. The U.S. dollar has been the most important currency in my entire life. And so we're like, what?
Well, ask Africans.
Yeah. It's like, what? And he's like, yeah, like by far. I mean, we don't trust the naira. Like we all want dollars. I was like,
no.
I think like gave us a perspective, and it gave us a way to sort of talk about money in the book. I think that was very broad. So, there are all sorts of stories in there in the first chapter about how money is broken and how we're under financial surveillance and how, a lot of governments are using monetary means to oppress their people. And then in chapter 2, we introduce Bitcoin and how it fixes all of these things that are broken in the monetary system today. And then chapter 3 is about price, because everyone asks about price and why the price moves the way it does. Chapter 4 is about, human rights and how it relates to Bitcoin specifically. And, one of my other co-authors is Alex Gladstein, who's the Chief Strategy Officer for the Human Rights Foundation. And and he's been seeing that in the field of human rights, that Bitcoin is becoming more of a thing. That a lot of people, like, if you want to support certain organizations in certain countries, like it's very hard to, because the governments of those countries don't like those organizations, so they'll just cut off the bank account and make it very, very, very difficult. Now with Bitcoin, there's a way for them to actually do things, which it's very interesting in of itself. So, there's a whole chapter on how it helps with human rights, and then the last chapter is about what the future might look like with Bitcoin. So, and then there's a whole like Q&A section at the end for people that, like just the common questions that we've been asked over the years that a lot of people ask, and they're all in there. It's a very short read. We've translated it into a couple languages already, Spanish and Portuguese. We have in the works like 18 other languages, which we're hoping to get out in the next few months or so. But yeah, it's a little bit slow with the quarantine and everything.
And what about your views on the CIS regions with the development of this technology? Where do you think it's going? Because I see a boom, actually. And also want to know what projects you have in place with your colleagues in Nigeria, and would you be interested in having any projects in these regions?
Well, so I'm not an expert in Africa. I think if this is a fertile ground for entrepreneurism. I think because like it takes a lot of the difficulty of working in Africa like much easier, because like the financial stuff is actually very, very difficult in almost every African country, because the currencies tend to be very illiquid, so people tend to want to use the dollar, but then like it's hard to do business in the dollar. Like it gets all very tricky, right? Like it's there are lots of obstacles that go into it. With Bitcoin now there's a rail, so it does allow for more investment in that area. But again, like I try to leave it to the people that are very good at those particular things. I'm a coder, I'm a programmer, so that's what I know how to do, and that's what I try to make my money doing. And I think that's really the way in which people should make money, is whatever you happen to be talented in, whatever skills that you've developed, if you can use them to go make money, that's that's probably how you're going to fit into the world. I don't have a particular insight into these regions or how to invest in them or how to economically develop them.
Are you open to it? Are you open to it? Because this is what I've noticed. Please take no offense. But America is a world on its own. You guys drive on the left side. You don't use the metric system. Like everything is just upside down there. So are people open to actually, just looking across the pond, looking what's happening in the world, just being part of a movement? Because I guess, Bitcoin, because it's decentralized, everybody should be on board.
Yeah, I mean, people are into Bitcoin, but I think you're asking more specifically about investment in Africa and other places, in third world countries and so on.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's a very interesting question, because in a sense, the way economics works is that people invest where they can make money, and if they can make money, you'll get money, right? Like you'll get investment. The problem here is that because of the way that the world monetary order is currently set up, it's very hard to make money in Africa, and everyone knows this. So you have to have sort of this additional moral imperative in order to get people to invest there. I don't think that's a sustainable model, because you can only guilt people into investing in something to a certain degree. But once people can make money, they will throw their money at you. They will be like, shut up and take my money right now. The trick is to get to that point, and I don't think we're there yet, but I do think that Bitcoin can get us there. Once you have money, right now, like Africans are totally getting screwed by the dollar, and we outline all of this in chapter 1, right? Like if you try to send money between 2 different African countries,
oh God.
I mean, how much in fees you pay. It's like an insane amount of money. And the reason for that is because there's no liquidity against each other. So if you have 2 different, like the Nigeria Naira, and the Kenyan shilling or something like that, and if you were trying to transfer both, there's no liquidity against each other. So what you have to do is find liquidity against the Naira, and it's almost always the dollar. So you have to trade the Naira for the dollar, and then you have to trade the dollar for the shilling. And that, so every time you transfer money between two African countries, some banker in New York makes money. How unfair is that? Just think about that. Like, how unfair is that? That some banker in New York is making money off of transactions between two African countries. So that monetary order just absolutely screws over any third world country, and any sort of national central banking currency that doesn't have much liquidity, like most African countries have. So as a result of that, what you get are these very low liquidity pools, very hard to invest in, and it's very hard to make money. And on top of that, a lot of these governments have have very little investment coming in, so they try to print money to create their own investment, which leads to hyperinflation and all sorts of nasty
inflation.
Yeah, and then you get based on inflation and things like that, you get more war, you get more social unrest and things like that, which has happened all over Africa for a long time. So,
just the circle.
From a monetary standpoint, it's a lot of third world countries have been screwed as a result of the monetary order. You remove a lot of that monetary order, put it on a politically neutral money, something like Bitcoin. Now there's an actual way in which something like good investment within the these third world countries makes a lot more sense, because you can get potentially really good returns on them, because a lot of development is desired. There's a lot of consumers. There's a lot of natural resources. If you had the right monetary order, instead of having a central banking currency that's very weak and very illiquid against other currencies, you have something like Bitcoin. Now it's a lot easier to do international trade. Now it's a lot easier to invest there, and now it's a lot easier for people to create goods and services, and you can make a much better return. So, to answer your question, going back to are people willing to invest in these places? It will happen when there is a good return, and I believe that there will be a good return once we're on something like the Bitcoin standard, but that's unfortunately a little bit of time away.
I like what Armenia is doing right now, because they have created a free economic zone. So maybe that's something that we can apply. Maybe we can have some sort of free economic zones in different parts of different nations, just to remove the excess fat and corruption. What do you think? Is this a solution?
Yeah, I mean, generally, more freedom means that more economic activity. I mean, I think the best example that we've seen of that is the development of Hong Kong versus the rest of mainland China. For a long time, up until 2000, right? Like Hong Kong was, British protectorate or something like that. The rest of mainland China was under communism, and you saw it's more or less the same exact people. And you saw the development of Hong Kong. It became an economic powerhouse very, very quickly, whereas the rest of China was sort of mired in backwardsness. And you could kind of see Hong Kong as a free economic zone. And if you've ever visited there, you find out very quickly that that's something that they value very strongly, is the economic freedom that they have. So, I mean, I don't know if setting a particular zone as a free economic zone is the solution. I think the entire country being a free economic zone is the solution. There are reasons why Dubai and Abu Dhabi and various places like that have the wealth that they do. They're quote unquote free economic zones in a very limited way within the sphere of influence that they have. But, I mean, it goes deeper than that, though, because the monetary world order does make it very difficult for you to set up one of those things. And it's not just one government. There's all sorts of foreign policy considerations when you're creating one of those things that make it very, very difficult. And, you have to have infrastructure to support the free economic zones and so on. I think Korea tried one, and that place is complete, no one lives there, right? It takes a very long time for some of these places to come to fruition. So it can be quite a long-term investment. I suspect that it will be easier just to lower the tax burden, get on even a dollar standard is better oftentimes than the central banking standard. That a lot of third world countries operate in, or get on the Bitcoin standard and use that as a way to free up the sort of human capital that's available in the country and allow people to create goods and services and so on.
And don't you think it's ironic that countries that, okay, for instance, with Russia, for instance, having a lot of oil, with Africa having a lot of natural resources, I think I see a trend where it's the richest countries, besides Dubai, I guess, or the United Emirates regions, that are the poorest nations. Don't you see a correlation between that?
Yeah, so it's a there's definitely something about that you're hitting that that I think is a part of the monetary world order, and this is a sad reality, but we're under a dollar hegemony. Essentially, the U.S. controls everything, and this happened towards the end of World War II. There was a small agreement made in a hotel in New Hampshire called the Bretton Woods Agreement, and essentially it made it so that everyone in the world was on the gold standard, but through the dollar. So it was called the dollar exchange standard. So instead of keeping gold in their vaults, they put dollars in their vaults. And this led to everything getting settled in the dollar. And as a result, the U.S. has had the ability to print dollars whenever they want. And the rest of the world sort of has to take it. And they have to take the inflation, oftentimes hyperinflating their own currency to keep up. But they're the ones that the U.S. has the ability to sort of export inflation. So the way in which a lot of these natural resources get into the United States, well, first of all, a lot of these natural resources simply aren't developed, right? Like especially in Africa, there's all sorts of ore and just raw materials that are available in Africa that are still stuck in the ground. No one's mining them. No one's taking them out. The exception is stuff like the exception are things like diamonds and gold, and we know what's happened to those. But taking those two things as an example, what generally happens is that because the U.S. has so much monetary influence over all of these countries, what ends up happening is that the actual diamonds and gold, for example, as raw materials, get dug out of the ground in Africa and they get sold for dollars. So those dollars get traded, but then because manufacturing is lacking, they go out of the country again in exchange for these foreign goods and so on. So again, like in a sense, it's the U.S. has an inordinate amount of power over everybody else through foreign policy as a way to control things from a monetary perspective. And it's not obvious exactly how they get their grubby hands on the resources of other countries, but this is how it works. The other thing is the more important than natural resources and raw materials is people, and that's the real resource that is more valuable than anything on earth. And I truly believe that. The countries that I think have the best future are the ones that have a lot of people that are living close together that can develop cool and new things. And
sounds like socialism.
Well, no, that's not so. No. If you study the growth of cities, that's where all the cool things are being invented. That's where new things are being made.
You mean Silicon Valley?
Isolated. Not necessarily Silicon Valley, but throughout history, the reason why Europe developed the way it did was largely because it was just so dense, right? Like there were so many people living in small places, whereas like the continent of Africa was actually pretty sparse, right? Except North Africa. There were parts of North Africa that were fairly dense, but like sub-Saharan Africa, especially, there just weren't as many people congregated in one place. When you have a lot of people in one place, what ends up happening is that there are a lot more new ideas, that there are a lot more new inventions, a lot more new innovations that happen. And we saw this in Asia, especially post-World War II. A lot of these Asian nations that managed to, come out of poverty. And
Yeah.
post-war Japan, post-war Korea, post-war Singapore, right? All of these places had a lot of like most of them actually don't have very many natural resources, but the thing that they do have are a lot of people, and people are a tremendous resource because they're the ones that are able to put their mind and their labor into creating new goods and services. And when you have a lot of people, well, then you're going to have lots of goods and services. And one of the encouraging things about Africa is it's the fastest growing from a population standpoint than anywhere else in the world. So that's the advantage that will, I think, help Africa to catch up with the rest of the world in terms of technology and standard of living and things like that. And we're already kind of seeing it a little bit. It's happening slowly, but at least a lot of the people have cell phones, for example. And as you get more of a population, as long as there isn't too many devastating wars or anything like that, you should see the continent flourish. And this is when like investment starts making sense, when there is room for lots of goods and services and so on that other people want.
That was such a nice answer. So I want to move on to some different topic. It's not really related, but it's closely related. So when Bitcoin first came out, there was this uproar from the banks, JP Morgan, this, that, the next. And Mark Zuckerberg came up with this idea of his Facebook coin. I think it was called Libra. And they were all over him. So what do you think Bitcoin did right? And how do you think they were really on him when he tried to come out with this new currency?
Yeah, I mean, I know some people that were involved with the Libra project, and basically it's so I have my own opinions on Libra and why they were trying to create it. So like as a technical person that knows a thing. Yeah. So a thing or two about what Facebook is doing. You have to understand that Facebook makes most of its money from ads, and you already know this, right? Like they show ads to people, and they get some amount of money. It turns out that they have something like 2 billion users, which is an insane number of users, right, all around the world. Most of their money comes from maybe 100 or 200 million of the top people in the world, and they're mostly in the United States and Europe and Asia, something like that. So they're not making money off of the other billion plus people that are on the Facebook platform. So what I think they were trying to do with Libra was actually to create some sort of a way to trade with something like the dollar, right? And this is a very lucrative business if you know anything about Visa, MasterCard, all of these, American Express, all of these companies. They take a cut of each transaction, usually a percentage. So what Facebook was trying to do was monetize the other billion plus people on their platform. And if they could get a currency that, like pretty much everyone around the world has Facebook, right? And so if they wanted to essentially be a way to be kind of like what WeChat is in China. And that is the ability to, transfer money or whatever. I think M-Pesa is very similar. The idea is doing it that way, but pegged to another currency so that people would actually use it, and then they can make money off of the other billion plus people that are on the platform instead of something like the top 500 million people that are that are on Facebook. So this was their way to, and it's a very smart move if you think about it. This, if they can succeed, then they can totally make a lot of money, and it's a very easy way to penetrate, and it's a natural extension of the social media network that they built. The problem is that a lot of governments did not like it, and for good reason, because of the privacy implications and so on. Generally, if you're going to make a platform like that, you have to be kind of like WeChat or some sort of like Chinese government, some sort of authority that's collecting all of that information. And the fact that a private company would have that information is kind of scary. And I'm sure you know about like
too much power.
Chinese. Yeah. Well, but you know about all of the Chinese investment in Africa, and not just Africa, but all over the world in third world countries.
It's scary. It's
Yeah, yeah.
scaring me
And
too.
there's a reason why they're doing that. The reason is because they know that the dollar is dominant everywhere in the world. This is their way to make their currency more dominant. And they know they're not going to win in Europe, but they can win in in a third world country or something like that. So by investing in these places, what they want to do is to make WeChat a lot more something like WeChat, something like a Chinese digital currency, a means of settlement for international trade, and that way they can have influence over their sphere and not be subject to all of the things that the U.S. is doing. I think Facebook would actually be a stabilizing force around the world, because then people would have access to something like the equivalent of the digital dollar. Instead of having to go to the black market and having to, get physical U.S. dollars, you can use something like, like something like a phone to be able to do it. But the centralized nature of Facebook makes it very, very dangerous, and it means that like Facebook becomes sort of like a government in some ways, because some dictator in some country doesn't like some organization. They can say, well, Facebook, I'm going to cut you off unless you you cut off their Facebook account and give me all of their money, right? Like that sort of thing can happen. So for that reason, I think it is dangerous. But we know that money is a big problem, especially in third world countries, and people have a very hard time storing value, and they hoard U.S. dollars for that reason. Having some digital alternative, I think, wouldn't be a bad thing. But again, I think Bitcoin is the one that should fill that role, not necessarily something like Libra.
Because it stayed afloat. So I think Bitcoin did something right, obviously.
All
All right.
It's decentralized. It's a big deal.
Okay, so for example, let's say we have these talented kids in Africa with no means of accessibility to information. So you've already touched on ways that we can improve infrastructure and whatnot. But I just wanted to sort of close this by asking you what your projects are in terms of helping, talented kids, or in other nations, or what are you doing just basically to give back to the community and to just have I know you're a professor, I know you're working already with people like in the universities and everything, but I just like to know exactly what your plans are to just improve the general atmosphere of this, where we're going to.
Yeah, I mean, I've written a couple of books, and
okay, yes,
if you want to, it's open source. You can go look it up on my GitHub. You can go if you know some programming, you can learn all about Bitcoin using my course or using my book that you can read online for free. So as long as you have an internet connection, you can go look it up, go through the class. You will probably be better than like 95% of all quote unquote Bitcoin developers around the world. So you have that. I mean, I try to give back in some ways, but I mean, I've been sort of skeptical of a lot of like charities and things like that, in large part because I know how they run and how weird they are and things like that. So I stay away from getting involved in specific organizations. I know how bureaucratic they can get and how inefficient they are. So
nobody likes bureaucracy.
No, and it doesn't work. But as far as like teaching people and things like that, I mean, I've given away scholarships to my course to a lot of people actually, and to my knowledge, I think I've had like 4 or 5 students from Africa, and I've taught over like 500 people. So out of those, I've had at least 4 or 5. I know one guy that flew from Nigeria to Tampa, Florida in order to take my course. I was like, how long was the flight? 36 hours. Okay, all right. And you came just to take the class. So he's like, yes.
You're doing something right. That means you're doing something right. The word is spreading. People are taking a lot of interest in you. So yeah, just keep up the good work, and I'm very proud to have known you and have this conversation with you, and I wish you all the best.
Well, thank you very much.